It's been a little while since I've been on with you, but our pastor is encouraging us to study and talk about the story of David and Goliath. So we talked about it at kids church last night with the kids, and then I just kind of sat down with my Bible this morning and I opened it up, and the story of David and Goliath starts in 1 Samuel 17. But in talking to a friend this morning about just a lot of fear that she has surrounding sending her kids to school, and really just fear that is just almost worse than the virus itself that has kind of swept the nation, is I wanted to talk to you guys about confronting your fears. And the Lord showed me something in the story of David and Goliath today, which is a little bit different than we normally see. We normally talk about the story of David and Goliath, and we talk about how David was a 12-year-old boy who defeated Goliath, but we don't realize like the underlying story here is that the Israelites feared the Philistines. As a matter of fact, the Bible, my expositor's Bible, says that the Philistines were an inward foe. This means that Israel as a nation and the Philistine territory was inside of Israel. So this was kind of a nagging, taunting, inward battle, enemy that the Israelites constantly dealt with. Right, this inward foe is what my expositor's Bible talks about. And that's kind of what we're dealing with right now. We're kind of dealing with this inward fear, this inward battle where we're just constantly, our world is in turmoil, our friends are in turmoil, our family is in turmoil, and we just never know what our day-to-day life looks like. So I wanted to go over some points with you guys that I saw in the story today that just really got me excited. And really, I wanted to show you exactly what the Philistines and what Goliath represented in this story, is they represent our fear, right? They were terrified. The Philistines were a relentless enemy. Do you hear me? If you study the Old Testament at all, the Philistines continue to show up over and over and over again. So one of the things that I noticed, and it says in 1 Samuel 17:9, that Goliath brings a proposition to the Israelites. And this is what he says. He says, whoever wins this battle, we will be the other servant. Meaning, if the Philistines defeat the Israelites will become our slaves. And if you Israelites defeat us Philistines, then you're going to be our slaves. And that's what happens. If you don't defeat your fears, if you don't face your fears, you will become a slave to them. You will serve your fears. You will serve your anxieties. You will serve the things that taunt you. And that's exactly what Goliath is proposing here. He's proposing that you will serve us if we defeat you. And essentially, there was no doubt in their mind they were going to defeat them. Goliath was 9 foot tall. And I'm going to go over some of the things that Goliath used in the natural that David did not. So hang with me. So my notes said that you will serve what you fear, and you will run from it. So the Israelites are posed with this thing. They have to go and they have to face the Philistines, but they're running scared. Like, of all the people that were posed for battle, that were trained in battle, not one of them, even the king of the country himself, the one who instructs the battle, was scared crapless of Goliath and scared just crazy of the Philistine army. And nobody will face the fear. Nobody will take them on. They're all running from it. They're all running from their fear. And so what happens is, you'll see a little bit later in 1 Samuel 17, is that for 40 days, the Philistines are taunting the Israelites. And Goliath is saying, send out somebody that's brave enough to fight me. So you have this 9 foot tall man who is just taunting and taunting and taunting, and everybody is scared. Well, David's just this little shepherd boy whose brothers are in battle, and the dad says, hey, why don't you take some food over to your brothers? And when David gets there, he sees the issue at hand, that the Philistines and Goliath are taunting the Israelites. And they're not only taunting, they're mocking. Fear and the enemy will mock your God. It'll mock. Who does God think he is? Who do you think you are? What God is going to save you? What God is going to save you from this? Fear is real. There was no illusion. The Israelites were facing a real battle. It was a real fear, and Goliath and the Philistines were a real opposer. Okay? Coronavirus, sickness, illness, fear of germs, all this stuff is a real pressing fear right now. It's in our faces every time we have to put our kids on the school bus, every time we drop our kids off at school, every time the phone rings and the caller ID says it's PRC lower elementary. The fear is there. It's real. It's a real pressing enemy, and it's taunting them. But they're choosing to do nothing about it. They're scared. And David hears all this, and he's a 12-year-old boy, but he recognizes he's talking about my God. Y'all are, why? Somebody do something. And David is this young boy who is just, somebody's got to do something. But nobody does anything because they're just frozen in fear. And the fear is taunting, and it's pressing, and it's real, and it's calling out to them every single day for 40 days. And David says, you know what? I've had enough. And he goes to King Saul and he tells King Saul, send me, I'll go. And King Saul's like, wait a minute. First of all, you're 12. You're a shepherd boy. And when he realized, okay, nobody else is going to step up. So what else? What do we have to lose? What do we have to lose? Really, I'm paraphrasing, but what do we have to lose? Let's send David. And he starts trying to give David all of these worldly armor. Take the sword, take the helmet, take the this and that. And David is like this tiny little boy. So none of this stuff fits him. None of this stuff is going to work. And he's probably going to pass out on the battlefield before he ever gets to Goliath, because all of these worldly weapons are heavy. They're heavy, and none of them is going to work. Not only did David say that he wasn't skilled or proved, I haven't proved myself for this, meaning I don't know how to use any of this, but this is what David does know. He knows that God has gone before him before. David knows that God was with him whenever he killed the bear and the lion, because it was David's job to protect the sheep. So when David was being obedient and doing what he was supposed to do and relationshiping with the Lord every single day, David knew the Lord had protected before. So we see two different scenarios. If you read in 1 Samuel 17, this is what the Bible said that Goliath had. Goliath had a helmet. It covered his head to protect his head. Goliath had brass on his legs, brass on his arms. He had a coat of mail, which is like almost like a fence-like coating. It basically was to keep spears from going in, arrows from going in. It was this heavy metal armor. It weighed 125 pounds. He had a heavy spear. And not only did he have that, he had a shield bearer, somebody that would go before him with a shield. So Goliath was completely protected by worldly means. Sounds a lot like maybe like antibiotics, ivermectin, vaccine, right? All of these things that protect us in the physical, right? Protect us in the physical. I told a friend today, when we take antibiotics, we never think to ourselves, this may not work. I never gave my child antibiotics and thought this isn't going to work. Goliath has everything done in the physical. He's taken his vitamin D and his calcium and his zinc, and still he has everything that he needs by worldly standards. But what is David going to use? David tells Saul, I'm not going to use any of that stuff because I don't know how to use it. But what I can do is use what's in front of me. I can use what's in front of me. And he has a slingshot, and he bends down and he picks up 5 smooth stones, tucks them away, and heads off for battle. But this is what David does. David has rehearsed to Saul, the king, everything God has done before. David begins to rehearse all of God's goodness, where God has protected him before, all of these things. That's what David is rehearsing. And then he steps into battle. You see, we're so busy looking at all of the things on the outside that are scary and that are real. You know, my husband was in ICU for COVID. COVID is real, okay? There's some craziness surrounding it, but it doesn't take away from the fact that we're facing a real virus. We are in a global pandemic. There's not somebody that you don't know that is not right now immediately affected by death, by sickness, by fear. Everybody is panicking. The doctors say do this, the government says do this, your friend says do this, your friend get vaccinated, don't get vaccinated, wear a mask, don't wear a mask. Woo! And the world's going crazy. And yet who's going to step forth and say, wait a minute? God has, and that's what God took me through. God took me through this season with COVID with my husband, and he said, "Hey, April, where was the medicine when Corey was seizing in the chair?" I mean, I can tell you, you go listen to my podcast, go watch my previous videos. Everything was so pressing and so real, but I had to remember God's goodness. I had to remember what God did before and saved my family and protected my daughter and all of these things. And that's what David is doing. David rehearses and he steps up and with one stone pegs Goliath right here, and the man drops dead. There wasn't one piece of worldly armor that Goliath was wearing that saved him when God stepped in. When God steps on the scene, when we face our fears, when we tell our fears, you might be real, but my God is greater. When supernatural strength and supernatural faith rises up, there is no worldly protection that can save, but supernatural faith steps in. See, Goliath was using worldly weapons, but David was using spiritual weapons. He was using, he remembered, I wrote down all the things that Goliath had. And then I said, but David had a slingshot and 5 little stones, but he had something greater. He had the memories and the victories before that he rehearsed. He had faith that God would show up. He had spiritual defense. So the day that my husband had a seizure and I had to call the ambulance, and I had, and look, I'm not telling you this, you guys, to make me sound like some super spiritual person. I was scared. I was scared out of my mind. I'd never seen anything like that before. When I heard my husband scream out seizing, and it drove me, I was sitting in this chair and out that door, and just on the other side of that door was a real fear. I tremble when I think about it because it was so real. But in that moment, all I could do was hold him and thank the Lord. Thank you, God, for protecting him. Thank you, God, he wasn't on a piece of equipment today. Thank you, God, he was home today. And I held him and I said, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare us a table before me in the presence of my enemy. The enemy is real. The fear is real. The virus is real, but God is bigger. God will go before you. He'll go beside you. He'll go behind you. Do not run from your fears. David said, I'll face my fear, and I'll do it through the power of the Lord. I'll do it through the victory of the Lord. And guess what? That day, they did not become slaves to the Philistines. They did not become slaves to their fear. Their fear became slaves to them because they declared the goodness of God. When God does something, there ain't going to be a trace of human on it. God is working in supernatural. I prayed over my friend today and I said, may God's supernatural favor, supernatural faith go before you, because this man, Goliath, had everything on the outside protecting him, and not one of those things protected him from David's rock. There's not one thing the enemy can do that can take away God's goodness, God's favor. So today you have a choice. You can run from your fear. You can let it overwhelm you. You can think about all the bad things. You can get off social media if you're depressed and anxious. Get off social media. Turn the news off and start to remember the things that God has done, where He has delivered you in your life, where He has protected you when nothing could protect you, because there was no seizure medicine and there was nothing. The ibuprofen I gave my husband that morning to kill his fever couldn't protect him from what was coming. But God protected him. He was home in that chair instead of running a piece of equipment. He was home in that chair when he seized. So the seizure was real, but God's protection was bigger. I task you today to remember the things of God. Face your fears, but face them with a supernatural faith that supersedes everything. Coronavirus is real, but God is bigger. You guys be blessed today.